The chamber was enormous. It was built that way, on purpose. The ceiling rose so high that the top of it disappeared into shadow. The walls were covered in banners, 47 of them, one for each civilization that was part of the Galactic Concord. The banners were made of strange materials from distant worlds. They moved slowly, even though there was no wind. The whole room smelled of something old and important, the way places smell when power has lived in them for a long time. Sarah Voss sat at the far end of the long, curved table. Her chair was smaller than the others. It was placed lower than the others too, so that when she sat in it, she had to look slightly upward to see the faces of the delegates around her. This was not an accident. Nothing in the Concord chamber was an accident. The architects who built this room had followed very specific instructions. Junior members sat low. Senior members sat high. Humanity had been a junior member for 300 years. She had a glass of water in front of her, nothing else. The other delegates had screens, attendants, food, and drinks that bubbled or glowed. She had water. She did not complain about this. She never complained about anything in this room, because she had learned a long time ago that complaining in this room only made the others enjoy themselves more. The delegate from the Vreth Dominion was speaking. His name was Councillor Drax. He was tall, with gray-blue skin and 4 fingers on each hand. His voice was deep and smooth, the kind of voice that always sounded like it was explaining something simple to someone who was not very bright. He had been speaking for 20 minutes, and would probably speak for 20 more. He was talking about the Keth. Everyone in the room knew about the Keth. The Keth swarm was a disaster that moved through space the way fire moved through dry grass. It did not think. It did not plan. It simply consumed planets, stations, ships, anything it touched. It had started in the outer rim of the galaxy, far from the great civilizations and their beautiful core worlds. For decades it had been spreading slowly, eating through systems that nobody powerful lived in. Those systems had humans in them. Small colonies, mining towns on rocky planets, farming settlements on worlds that barely had atmosphere, research posts at the edges of known space. These were the places where humans had gone because the Concord had quietly pushed them there over the years. The good planets, the green ones, the warm ones, the ones with easy air and clean water, those had been claimed long ago by the senior members of the Concord. Humans got what was left. But what humans got, they kept. For 40 years, the people living in those outer rim colonies had been fighting the Keth. Not because the Concord ordered them to, not because they were paid to. They fought because the Keth showed up at their doors, and they had children inside those doors. They built walls out of salvage, and fought with old weapons, and called for help that never came, and they held on anyway. The Concord knew this. Every delegate in the room knew this. The data was available to anyone who looked for it. 18 million humans had died in the Outer Rim over the last 4 decades. 18 million. The Concord had never recorded those deaths in any official document. The losses were listed under a category called Outer Rim Attrition, which was a phrase designed to make a massacre sound like weather. Councillor Drax finished his speech and sat down. There was polite applause from several delegates. Then the Aelhari representative, a thin creature with large pale eyes named Elder Sorvan, stood and began to speak. He talked about resource management and strategic necessity, and the unfortunate reality of frontier positioning. He used a lot of long words to say a simple thing. He was saying that the human colonies should keep dying. The formal proposal on the table was clean and official. It had a number and a title, and several pages of supporting documents. What it said, in the language that bureaucracies use when they want to do something ugly without sounding ugly, was this: the Outer Rim human colonies would be officially designated as expendable buffer zones. The Concord would provide no military support, no evacuations, no weapons, no aid of any kind. The humans already there would stay there, and they would absorb the Keth advance, and they would do it alone, and this would give the Concord time to prepare its core worlds for a threat that might never actually reach them now, because the humans would be in the way. Because the humans were always in the way. Sarah Voss listened to all of this without moving. Her face did not change. Her hands were flat on the table. She breathed slowly and steadily. The the way someone breathes when they have made a decision and are simply waiting for the right moment. When Elder Sorvan finished speaking, the chamber began to move toward a vote. This was expected. The outcome was expected too. The senior members would vote yes. The junior members would object weakly and be ignored. The proposal would pass. The human colonies would be legally abandoned, and by next session, everyone would have moved on to other business. But before the vote was called, Sarah Voss raised her hand. The room went quiet in a slightly annoyed way, the way a room goes quiet when someone unimportant speaks at the wrong time. "Ambassador Voss," said the session chair, a round creature from the San theocracy. "You wish to speak?" "No," she said. Her voice was calm. Not angry. Not sad. Just calm, the way a road is calm. "I wish to request a recess." There was a short silence. "A recess," repeated the chair. "Yes. 72 hours. Councillor Drax leaned to the delegate beside him and said something quietly. Several others exchanged looks. Some of them smiled. It was the kind of smile that powerful people use when someone beneath them does something predictably small. They had seen this before. Junior members sometimes asked for recesses before difficult votes. They needed time to accept things. They needed time to grieve, to adjust, to find a way to agree to something they did not want to agree to. It was, the senior delegates believed, very human behavior. "Granted," said the chair. "The session will resume in 72 hours. Sarah Voss nodded once. She picked up her glass of water, finished it, set it down neatly, and stood up. She straightened her jacket. She looked at the room, at the banners, at the high ceiling, at the faces of 46 alien delegates looking back at her with patience or amusement or barely concealed boredom. She looked at all of it the way a person looks at something they will not see again. Then she walked out. The doors closed behind her. The chamber stayed quiet for a moment. Then someone made a joke in a language she no longer needed to understand, and the room filled with comfortable laughter. Nobody followed her. Nobody thought to. 72 hours was a very short time. But it was enough. The first thing that happened was silence. Not the silence of nothing going on. The silence of many things going on, very carefully, with no noise attached to them. Admiral Cale Draven was a large man with short gray hair and the kind of face that looked like it had been carved rather than grown. He had spent 30 years in the human colonial fleet. He had fought in 6 engagements against the Keth, 2 of which were not in any official Concord record because the Concord had never officially acknowledged that those battles happened. He was not a man who needed things explained to him twice. When the message came from Ambassador Voss, it was 4 words long. He read it once. Then he opened a channel to every human fleet commander in active space and gave a single order. No speech, no explanation, just coordinates and a time. Every human warship that was not in the middle of an active engagement began to move. They did not move fast. Fast movement attracted attention. They moved the way clouds move slowly, naturally, as if they had simply decided to be somewhere else. One by one, then in groups, the ships turned away from Concord-adjacent space and began traveling inward, toward human territory, toward home. The fleet was coming together, 300 light-years away, on a cold administrative station above a planet called Reach. Director Mina Ose was already working. She had been working since before the message arrived, because she was the kind of person who kept contingency plans for her contingency plans. She ran the Colonial Authority, which was the organization responsible for every human settlement outside Earth's solar system. She knew every colony by name. She knew their populations, their resources, their weaknesses, and their distances from the nearest Keth active zone. She did not panic. Panicking was slow and loud, and she did not have time for either. She opened 63 simultaneous communications to colony administrators across the Outer Rim. Her instructions to each of them were simple, specific, and delivered without emotion. Begin consolidation. Identify essential personnel. Prepare transport lists. Do not use Concord communication channels. Do not explain publicly. Tell people it is a routine relocation exercise. The colony administrators had worked under her for years. They trusted her because she had never once given them a reason not to. They began moving people within the hour. Ships that had been sitting in maintenance yards were pulled out and refueled. Old transports that everyone had assumed were retired were quietly reactivated. Supply routes that had never appeared on any Concord logistics map because humans had built them privately, carefully, over many years, suddenly came alive with traffic. Children were told they were going on a trip. Families packed quickly and quietly, the way people pack when they have lived near danger long enough to know how. Nobody broadcast anything. Nobody filed any Concord transit forms. The paperwork that should have existed simply did not exist. And in a galaxy where bureaucracy was the primary language, the absence of paperwork was almost invisible. On Earth, inside a long, low building in the city of Geneva, the United Human Senate held a closed session. There were no cameras. There were no outside observers. There were no alien diplomatic representatives, because the session was not announced through any channel those representatives monitored. The senators arrived in ordinary vehicles and walked through an ordinary door and sat down in a room that looked like it was designed for nothing more important than budget meetings. The session lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes. The vote at the end of it was unanimous. Nobody recorded what was said in that room. The people who were there would talk about it differently in later years. Some would say it was loud. Some would say it was quiet. Some would say there were tears. Some would say there were none. But they all agreed on one thing. At no point did anyone in that room hesitate. While all of this was happening, in the intelligence offices of the Aelhari Collective on Citadel Station Voron 7, a young analyst named Thesari was staring at her monitoring screens with growing unease. Thesari was 26 years old by Aelhari counting, which made her very junior in an office full of experienced people who did not particularly want to hear from someone very junior. She was small and pale-eyed, the way all Aelhari were, and she had a habit of chewing the end of her stylus when she was thinking hard, which her supervisor found irritating. She was chewing it now. The data in front of her showed human ship movements across the past 18 hours. She had been assigned to monitor human fleet activity as a training exercise, the kind of work given to new analysts, because nobody important was expected to find anything interesting in it. Human fleet movements were almost always predictable. They moved toward trouble, because trouble in human space was usually at the edges, where the Keth were. But these ships were not moving toward the edges. She mapped the movements again. She checked her math. She pulled secondary data from relay buoys and cross-referenced it with known human port schedules. Every time she checked, the answer came back the same. The human ships were not spreading out. They were pulling in. They were concentrating. They were moving toward each other in a slow, calm, deliberate pattern that looked, if you watched it long enough, less like repositioning and more like gathering. She wrote a report. She flagged it as urgent. She sent it to her supervisor, who sent it to his supervisor, who had 17 other things demanding attention, and placed it in a review queue with an expected processing time of 4 days. Thesari sat back in her chair and looked at her screens. She thought about what it looked like when a creature that had been lying very still for a long time slowly began to stand up. She sent the report again, to a different address. That one also went unread. The hours moved. The ships moved. The people moved. Everything moved quietly, in the same direction, with the careful patience of something that had been planned for a very long time, by people who were very good at planning and very, very good at waiting. On Citadel Station, the Concord delegates ate dinner and discussed other business. Someone had introduced a proposal about trade tariffs on minerals from the San border worlds. There was a reception scheduled for the following evening. The humans would come back in 72 hours, accept the buffer zone designation with whatever small protest they managed to put together, and that would be that. Nobody checked the shipping lanes. Nobody looked at the colony population logs. Nobody read Thesari's report. The 72 hours ended at exactly the time they were supposed to end. Sarah Voss walked back into the chamber. She was carrying nothing but a small data chip in her left hand. She sat down in her small chair at the low end of the table. She folded her hands. She waited for the session to be called to order. Her face was the same as it always was, calm, steady, the face of someone who has already decided and is simply waiting for the world to catch up. The session was called to order at the scheduled time. The session chair, the round San delegate named Counselor Peth, tapped his ceremonial rod against the stone surface of his podium and announced that the chamber was in session. Delegates settled into their seats. Screens lit up. Attendants moved quietly along the edges of the room. The smell of the chamber, that old, powerful smell, filled the air the way it always did. Counselor Peth announced that the vote on Proposal 7, Sigma, the formal designation of Outer Rim human settlements as expendable buffer zones, would proceed. He asked if there were any final statements before the vote was recorded. Sarah Voss stood up. This was not unusual. Junior ambassadors were sometimes permitted brief statements before votes. It was seen as a courtesy, a way of letting smaller members feel they had been heard before being overruled. The statement would be noted in the record. The vote would proceed. Nothing would change. What was unusual was what she did next. She walked to the podium. The podium, at the center of the chamber, was not for junior ambassadors. It was not a written rule. There was no formal document that said junior members could not approach the central podium. It had simply never happened, because junior members understood their place without being told. The podium belonged to senior voices. Walking to it without being invited was the kind of thing that made the whole room go still, in a very particular way. The way a room goes still when someone does something they should know better than to do. Sarah Voss walked to it anyway. She placed the data chip on the flat surface in front of her. She adjusted the speaker slightly, out of habit. Then she looked at the room. The human delegation to the Galactic Concord, she said, formally withdraws from membership, effective at the close of this session. The silence that followed was total. It lasted for 3 full seconds, which in a room full of species that communicated rapidly was a very long time. Then everyone spoke at once. The noise was enormous. There were shouts in 6 languages. Counselor Peth hit his rod against the podium 3 times, then 5 times, then continuously, trying to call for order. Elder Sorvan of the Aelhari was on his feet with his pale eyes wide open, in a way that made him look genuinely frightened. Counselor Drax of the Vreth Dominion had gone very still, which was somehow louder than all the shouting. Sarah Voss waited. She waited for exactly as long as it took for the noise to drop enough that her voice would carry without her raising it. Then she continued. She spoke for 14 minutes. She did not use notes. She did not look at a screen. She had been preparing this speech in pieces for 11 years, adding to it quietly in the back of her mind every time she sat in the small chair at the low end of the table. Now she gave it the way a person gives something they have carried for a long time, without drama, without performance. Just clearly. Just completely. She talked about the 40 years of Outer Rim fighting. She named specific battles. She gave dates and coordinates and casualty numbers, not estimates, not approximations, real numbers from real records that the Concord had chosen not to keep. She talked about the supply routes that human freighters had maintained between Concord core worlds during the trade disruption of 70 years ago. Routes that had kept 3 Aelhari population centers from facing food shortages. She talked about the medical research that human scientists had contributed freely during the Grey Plague, research that had saved an estimated 40 million San lives, and for which humanity had received a formal letter of thanks, and nothing else. She talked about the mining quotas, the territory restrictions, the technology sharing agreements that flowed almost entirely in one direction. She talked about the 18 million dead in the Outer Rim, and she said that number slowly, clearly, with space around it, so that it could not be absorbed into the comfortable blur of bureaucratic language. The room was very quiet now. She pointed to the data chip on the podium. Everything I have described, she said, is documented on that chip. Dates, records, verified sources. You may examine it at your convenience. We have kept copies. Counselor Drax spoke then. His voice was still smooth, still deep, but there was something underneath it now, a pressure, like a hand pressing down on something it wanted to keep still. He said that withdrawal was not a recognized option under the Concord Charter. He said that humanity's membership was permanent, that the treaties signed 3 centuries ago were binding, that there would be consequences, serious consequences for any attempt to act outside those agreements. He said the word consequences in a way that was meant to feel like a door closing. Sarah Voss looked at him. She had dark eyes and a face that did not move easily, a face built for patience. She looked at Counselor Drax the way a mountain looks at weather, not unkindly, but without any concern at all. "The Charter," she said, "does not supersede human law. Human law, as ratified today by the unanimous vote of the United Human Senate, authorizes and directs this withdrawal. We are not asking for permission. We are providing notification, as a courtesy." She paused. "You have our forwarding address," she said. "Do not use it." She picked up the data chip and held it out. An attendant came forward uncertainly, and took it. Then Sarah Voss stepped back from the podium. She walked back toward the human section of the table, but she did not sit down. She stopped and looked at the other members of the human delegation, 12 people. Various roles, various ages, all of them watching her. She gave a very small nod. They stood up, all 12 of them, together, quietly. They gathered their things not hurriedly, not dramatically, but with the calm, orderly movements of people who had packed before this moment and were simply completing a task. They walked toward the door. The chamber watched. Nobody moved to stop them. Counselor Drax opened his mouth and then closed it. Elder Sorvan sat down slowly, as if his legs had made a decision without asking him. Counselor Peth held his rod and did not tap it. The door opened. The human delegation walked through it. The door closed. The banners on the wall moved slowly in the artificial air. 47 of them, one for each member. Except now one of those banners represented nobody. The seat at the bottom of the table was empty. The small chair sat there, in its low position, with nothing on the table in front of it except the outline where a glass of water used to be. The room stayed silent for a long time. Nobody laughed. The first week felt almost normal. The Concord held emergency sessions. Delegates argued about the legality of the withdrawal. Legal teams from 6 civilizations reviewed the original membership charter and came back with different answers, which led to more arguments. A committee was formed. Then a second committee was formed to review the findings of the first. Statements were issued. Strong language was used. Several senior members publicly declared that the human withdrawal would not stand, that it was invalid, that it would be addressed through proper channels. The proper channels took time. Time was something that seemed very available in that first week. By the end of the second week, the first reports came in from the outer rim. The Keth had moved. For 40 years, the Keth advance had pressed against the same rough boundary, a messy, irregular line across dozens of star systems that roughly corresponded to where human colonies were. The Keth pushed, the humans pushed back, and the line held. It did not hold because of brilliant strategy or superior technology. It held because of the specific and stubborn way that humans responded to things trying to kill their families. The line was not on any Concord map because the Concord had never officially recognized that it existed. Now the humans were gone, and the line was gone with them, and the Keth moved the way fire moves, when the thing that has been blocking it is removed. Not fast at first. A system here. A station there. The early reports were easy to minimize. Frontier losses. Expected attrition. The Concord's own military forces were already being repositioned to manage the situation. By the end of the first month, the situation was not being managed. The Concord military was old. Not old in terms of years, it had ships and weapons and personnel who had trained regularly, but old in terms of experience. The last real war the Concord had fought was 2 centuries ago. Since then, its forces had performed patrols, handled small disputes between member worlds, and occasionally suppressed protests on resource colony planets. They had not fought anything like the Keth. They did not know how the Keth moved, how it probed for weakness, how it flooded through any gap that opened up faster than you expected. Human commanders had spent 4 decades learning exactly these things, the hard and bloody way. That knowledge had walked out the door with Sarah Voss. The first major Concord fleet engagement with the Keth was a disaster. 300 ships went in with standard Concord combat doctrine: spread formation, long-range fire, coordinated withdrawal if numbers dropped below a safe threshold. The Keth did not read doctrine. It came from 4 directions simultaneously and hit the formation from the inside before the withdrawal order was half issued. The fleet pulled back. It had accomplished nothing. One of the senior Vreth commanders sent back a report that contained a line that got quietly removed from the official version. "We have no idea what we are doing." Meanwhile, other things were falling apart in quieter ways. The Concord's economic structure had been built over 3 centuries, and like all structures built over a long time, it had layers that nobody fully understood anymore. Humans had been in those layers. Not visibly, not at the top, never at the top, but deep inside, in the places where the work actually happened. Processing facilities, logistics routing, atmospheric management on 14 stations that had been built before any of the current member civilizations could run the systems themselves, medical supply chains, communications relay maintenance in the outer sectors. One by one, over the course of that first month, these things began to slow down, then stall, then stop. The Concord's economic advisors had models that told them exactly how dependent each system was on human labor and expertise. The models were wrong, not because the data had been falsified, but because the humans doing the work had been quietly making things function better than the official systems required, filling gaps and fixing problems that were never reported upward because they were never seen as important enough. When those humans left, the gaps and problems were still there. They just stopped being fixed. The Aelhari Collective's main food processing hub at Station Pellar lost 17% of its output in the first 3 weeks. The reason, when they finally found it, was that a single human technician named Daro Wes had been maintaining a secondary cooling system for 9 years, using components he sourced himself on an informal supply chain he had built from scratch. When he left with everyone else, the cooling system failed. The official system was not designed to compensate. Nobody had known the secondary system existed. There were hundreds of stories like Daro Wes. There were probably thousands that nobody found. And then the Vreth Dominion made its move. Councillor Drax had spent the first month being angry, which he was good at. He was less good at the part that came after anger, which was thinking clearly. He had the support of the Vreth Military Council, which had also been angry, and together they had concluded that the correct response to humanity's withdrawal was to demonstrate what consequences looked like. 3 Vreth fleets were assembled. Not small patrol groups, full deep space combat fleets, the largest the Dominion had deployed in 40 years. They crossed into the space that had once been the outer edge of Concord territory, and headed toward the boundary of what the human maps called human space. They flew for 6 days without seeing anything. On the 7th day, they found the grid. It was not a wall. It was not a battle formation. It was a network. Thousands of objects, spread across an enormous region of space, too small and too numerous to have been noticed by standard surveys. Some of them looked like debris. Some of them looked like nothing in particular. All of them were watching. The lead fleet slowed. The admiral sent probe ships forward. 3 probes went in. None came back, but nothing attacked them. They simply stopped transmitting, as if they had been switched off. The admiral requested instructions. The response from the Dominion was to push forward. He did not push forward. He was a careful man, and careful men recognized when they were standing in front of something they did not understand. He held position and kept sending reports. The grid did nothing. It simply watched. Every sensor sweep, the fleet ran, bounced back, incomplete, data, not jammed, not blocked, just insufficient. Whatever the grid was made of, it did not reflect information the way normal objects did. It gave back only what it wanted to give back. After 11 days, the Vreth fleets turned around. No order was given from the Dominion. The admiral simply decided, in the way that experienced military men sometimes decide things when their instincts are louder than their orders. He turned around and left human space behind. Not a single human ship had appeared. Not a single weapon had been fired. That was, somehow, the most frightening part. Thessarai was not in her junior analyst seat anymore. She had been pulled into a senior briefing room and asked to present her report, the one no one had read to an audience of 12 senior intelligence officials who were no longer dismissing junior analysts. She presented it carefully and answered questions for 2 hours. Her report's conclusion had been simple. She had written it weeks ago, before any of this happened, when she was still chewing the end of her stylus at a monitoring station that nobody thought was important. She had written, "We have made the mistake of measuring their power by how loud they were. They were never loud." In the briefing room, when someone asked her what she thought humanity was building in that space beyond the grid, she was quiet for a moment. "I think," she said carefully,